The house at Whitcombe Park had stood for 200 years, and in all that time, its hallways had never been quiet. There were always footsteps. There was always the sound of a kettle, or a brush against a rug, or a maid singing low under her breath when she thought no one could hear. The house breathed because the people inside it breathed, and the people inside it worked from before the sun came up until long after it went down. Maren Holloway was one of those people. She had been a housemaid at Whitcombe Park for 6 years, since the spring she turned 17. She knew the house the way some people knew the prayers they had learned as children. She knew which floorboards creaked. She knew which windows stuck in the damp months. She knew that the bell from the east drawing room rang twice when Mrs. Pell wanted tea, and 3 times when she wanted tea and a fire built up, and once, sharp and short, when she was angry about something and wanted someone to come and listen to her be angry about it. Maren was 23 years old. She was not tall. She was not short. Her hair was the color of wet sand, and she kept it pinned tight beneath her cap because that was the rule, and because the rule made sense. She had brown eyes that were quick and quiet. She had hands that were rough from soap and cold water but careful with everything they touched. She had a way of moving through a room that made people forget she was there, which was, in her work, a useful thing to be able to do. On the morning the new Duke was due to arrive, Maren was on her knees in the front hall, polishing the brass plate at the foot of the great clock. The clock had been wound that morning by Mr. Beech, the butler, as it had been wound every morning for 30 years. The smell of beeswax and lemon oil rose from the cloth in her hand. The marble floor was cold even through her wool stockings. She could hear, somewhere above her, the heavy tread of footmen carrying trunks. She could hear, somewhere behind her, Mrs. Pell, the housekeeper, telling a younger girl that the silver had to be done again because she could see a fingerprint on the soup tureen, and a fingerprint was a disgrace. The whole house had been turning itself inside out for a week. The old Duke had died in the winter. He had been a quiet man, very old, with white hair and a thin face, who had not come down from his rooms for the last 2 years of his life. Maren had carried trays up to him many times. He had always thanked her. He had once asked her name and forgotten it the next day and asked it again. And she had told him again, and he had nodded as if he meant to remember it this time. She had liked him. When he died, she had cried in the linen cupboard for 10 minutes and then come out and finished her work. The new Duke was a distant cousin. He had been in the army. He had been somewhere far away when the old man died, and the letters had taken months to find him. He was a stranger to the house, and a stranger to the staff, and the staff, in the way of staff everywhere, was afraid of him without having met him. A new master could change everything. A new master could turn out half the household with a word. They had all heard stories. He was due at noon. By 11, the front steps had been swept 3 times. By past, every servant in the house had been arranged in a line in the front hall, in order of rank, oldest at the front, youngest at the back. Maren stood near the back, between a kitchen maid named Susanna and a scullery girl who was so nervous her hands shook. The hall smelled of polish and starched linen, and the faint, sharp smell of fear. Outside, a thin rain was falling, and the windows were beaded with it, and the light that came through them was the soft grey light of an English spring that had not yet made up its mind about being spring. But the Duke did not come at noon. He did not come at 1. By 2, Mrs. Pell's mouth was a thin, hard line, and Mr. Beech was looking at his pocket watch every 3 minutes, and the youngest scullery girl had begun to cry quietly into her apron, because she had been standing for 3 hours, and her feet hurt, and she was sure she was about to be turned out for something she had not done yet. It was nearly 3 when the door-knocker finally fell. Mr. Beech swept toward the door. The line of servants stiffened. The rain pattered. The clock ticked. But the man who came through the door was not a duke. He was a tall man in a wet brown coat. His boots were muddy, his hat was old, he had dark hair that needed cutting, and a beard of about 3 days that he had not had the chance to shave, and he carried a single small leather bag that looked as if it had been across a great many roads. He was perhaps 30. He had a quiet face and very dark eyes, and when those eyes moved over the line of servants, Maren had the strange feeling that he was counting them, though his expression did not change. "Forgive me," he said. His voice was low and even. "I have come ahead of my master. He was delayed at the inn at Marston. He sends his apologies. I am to wait for him here, with your leave." Mr. Beech drew himself up. Mr. Beech was a man who believed firmly in the proper order of things, and the proper order of things did not include a muddy man arriving in place of a duke. "And who, sir, are you?" "His man of business," the stranger said. He gave a small, polite bow. "Robin Carrow, at your service." Mr. Beech did not look pleased. But the rules of hospitality were the rules of hospitality, and a duke's man of business, even one who arrived alone and on foot, and dripping rainwater onto the marble, could not be turned away. "Very well, Mr. Carrow, Mrs. Pell will see you to a room." We had not. That is, we had expected his grace himself by noon. "I know," the man said. "I am sorry for it." He took off his hat. He looked, for the first time, at the long line of servants who had been standing there since 11 o'clock. His eyes went from face to face. He did not hurry. When his gaze passed over Maren, it did not stop. She would remember that afterward, that on the day she first saw him, he had looked at her and looked past her, just like everyone else. "Thank you," he said to the room in general. "I am sure I have caused trouble. I hope my master will not cause more." Then he allowed Mrs. Pell to lead him away. The line broke up. The kitchen maid beside Maren let out a breath that turned into a laugh. The scullery girl wiped her face. Mr. Beech told them all to go about their work, and they went, and within 10 minutes Whitcombe Park looked very much as it always looked. Except that there was a stranger now in the small green bedroom at the end of the west hall, and the master of the house had still not arrived. Maren did not think much of him that first afternoon. There was too much else to do. The fires had to be built up again. The afternoon trays had to be brought to Mrs. Pell's parlour. Someone had spilled tea on the runner in the upper hall, and the runner had to come up and be cleaned and put back. She was very tired. Her knees hurt from polishing the brass. She did see him again that evening, though. She was passing through the small back corridor that led from the kitchens to the servants' stair, carrying a tray of broken bread for the chickens. When she nearly walked into him, he had come down the back stair, which no guest ever used, in his stocking feet, with a candle in one hand and his coat off and his sleeves rolled up. He was looking at the bottom step as if it had insulted him. "Forgive me," she said, stepping back. The bread tipped. She caught it. He looked up. In the candlelight his face was different than it had been in the hall. Tired, less guarded. He had the kind of mouth that did not smile easily but had not entirely forgotten how. "My fault," he said. "I was looking at this step. There is a crack in it." She glanced down. There was. A long crack ran across the wood of the lowest step, half hidden by the runner. "It has been there a long time," she said. "Mr. Beech says it can wait." "Does Mr. Beech come down these stairs at night?" She almost smiled. "No, sir, he does not." "Then perhaps it cannot wait." He looked at her properly then. He really looked. Most gentlemen, even gentlemen who were only men of business, did not look properly at a housemaid. They looked at her cap or at a place 6 inches above her head. This man looked at her face. "You came down them in the dark just now." "I had the candle, sir, and if the candle had gone out?" She did not know what to say to that. She was not used to being asked questions for which an honest answer was the right one. "Then I should have had to feel my way, sir, and tripped on the crack." "Perhaps," he nodded once, slowly, as if he had filed something away. Then he stepped aside, holding his candle a little higher to give her the light. "After you, then. I should not like to keep the chickens waiting." She passed him. She felt his eyes on her shoulders for one moment, and then he was behind her on the stairs, and then she was out the back door into the damp night, with the smell of wet earth in her nose, and the chickens muttering at her from inside their shed. She did not think about him after that, except once, in passing, when she remembered he had said the chickens. He had noticed she was carrying chicken bread. Most men would have noticed a tray and not what was on it. It was a small thing. She thought of it, and then she forgot it, and she went to bed because she had to be up at 5. The real Duke did not arrive that night. He did not arrive the next day, either. A letter came in the morning, written in a careful hand, explaining that His Grace had taken a chill on the road and was forced to remain at Marston until he could travel. Mr. Carrow, his man of business, was to make himself useful in the meantime. He was to look over the books. He was to walk the grounds. He was to do whatever a Duke's man of business did when the Duke himself was sneezing in a country inn 10 miles away. Mr. Carrow did all of these things. He spent his mornings in the study with the steward, Mr. Halford, who was a sour man, and the two of them bent their heads together over ledgers. He spent his afternoons walking. He went out in his old brown coat and walked the long drive, and the home farm, and the wood beyond the lake, and he came back with mud on his boots and his hair full of wind. He spoke politely to everyone he passed. He thanked the footman who brought his tea. He asked the cook if she had any objection to him taking a slice of bread to eat as he walked. The staff, who had been ready to dislike him for his master's sake, did not quite manage to dislike him. He was too quiet for that. You could not dislike a man who said good morning to you and meant it. Maren saw him here and there, in the dining room, where he ate alone, and where she sometimes carried in the soup, in the library, where she dusted in the early mornings, and where she once found him already there, asleep in the armchair by the cold fire, with a book on his chest, as if he had not gone to bed at all. He had opened his eyes when she came in. He had looked at her for a long moment, and then closed them again and said, "Pretend I am not here, miss. I am pretending the same about myself." She had not known what to make of that. She had dusted the far end of the room and left him alone. On the 4th day, she met him on the back lane near the kitchen garden. She had been sent out to fetch parsley. He was coming back from the home farm. He had a streak of mud on his cheek that he did not know about, and his sleeves were rolled up despite the cool day, and he was carrying, Maren saw this and could not look away, a lamb. A very small lamb, perhaps 3 days old, with damp wool and long legs, and it was tucked under his arm with its head against his ribs, and it was perfectly calm. "Sir," she said. He stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the lamb. Then he looked at her again, and the corner of his mouth went up, very slightly, just for a second. "Its mother is ill," he said. "The shepherd has too many. I am taking it to the dairy. Mrs. Polson said she would warm milk for it. Do you think Mrs. Polson is the kind of woman who would in fact warm milk for a lamb?" "Mrs. Polson," said Maren, "would warm milk for the devil if he came to the kitchen door politely. The lamb will be safe." He nodded gravely. "I had hoped so." The lamb let out a thin, small sound. He looked down at it. "You are carrying it wrong," Maren said before she could think. He raised one eyebrow. Its legs are dangling. They are too thin. You want its weight on your forearm, with its legs tucked. Like this." She set down her basket and showed him with her hands in the air the gesture of how to hold a lamb. She had grown up on a tenant farm. She had carried 100 lambs. He shifted the small body. He was a quick learner. The lamb settled at once, made a soft, pleased sound, and laid its head along his arm. "There," she said. "Now it thinks you are its mother. That is a heavy responsibility. You should not have picked it up if you were not ready for the responsibility, sir." He looked at her then with a different look. Not surprise exactly. Something quieter, as if he were turning something over in his hand to see all its sides. Then he said, "What is your name?" "Maren, sir. Maren Holloway." "Thank you, Miss Holloway." He went on toward the dairy. She went on toward the parsley. She did not look back, but she thought she felt him look back at her, once before the path turned. She told herself she had imagined it. She did not tell anyone about the lamb. It was the sort of small private thing she did not want to share. Mrs. Pell, if she had heard about it, would have had an opinion. Mrs. Pell had an opinion about everything. The next morning Maren was carrying linens up the back stair when she met him again. He was coming down. He stepped aside on the narrow landing to let her pass. He had clean boots today and a coat that had been brushed, and his hair was a little tidier. He did not say anything as she passed him, but when she reached the top of the stair she turned, and he was still standing there, 3 steps down, and he was looking up at her. He was not smiling. He was not frowning. He was just looking. The way a man looks at something he is trying to understand. "Sir?" she said. "Forgive me." He shook his head once, as if waking. "It is nothing." He went on down the stairs. She stood at the top of the stair for a moment longer than she needed to, with her arms full of clean linen, and then she went on with her work and tried not to think anything in particular. There was a woman in the house she had not yet mentioned. Her name was Octavia Wexford, and she was a cousin of the dead Duke's on his wife's side, and she had been living at Whitcombe Park for 2 years. She was 35 years old. She had been beautiful once, in the way some women are beautiful at 20 and have to work to keep at 30, and she worked very hard. She wore silk in the morning. She had her hair done by her own maid, who had been with her from London. She drank coffee in the small drawing-room and read letters and wrote letters and waited. She had been waiting, the staff knew, for the new Duke. She had been waiting because the new Duke was unmarried. She had been waiting because she had no money of her own to speak of, and because the dead Duke, in his careful will, had left her only an allowance, and the allowance was small, and the allowance would stop when the new Duke turned her out. She had been waiting because if she could not be turned out, if, that is, she could become the new Duke's wife before he discovered he did not want her to be, she would be safe forever. She did not say any of this. She did not need to. The staff knew. Mrs. Pell knew. Mr. Beech knew. Even Maren, who was beneath Miss Wexford's notice almost entirely, knew. Miss Wexford had been displeased about the delay. She had been more displeased when she discovered that the man currently sleeping under the same roof as her was not the Duke, but a man of business. She had not bothered to come down to dinner the first night. She had sent her excuses and remained upstairs. On the second night, however, curiosity had overcome her. She had come down. She had taken her place at the long polished table, and she had looked across at Mr. Carrow in his quiet brown coat, and her interest in him had risen and fallen in the space of 3 minutes. He was nobody. He was a Duke's clerk. He was beneath her notice except as a source of information about his master. She turned all of her considerable charm toward getting information out of him. Maren, who served at the table that night, watched it happen. She watched Miss Wexford smile and lean forward and ask soft questions about his grace, and his health, and his tastes, and his habits, and his preferences in everything from wine to flowers to women. She watched Mr. Carrow answer almost none of them. He was polite. He was perfectly polite. But he said, again and again, that he was not at liberty to speak of his master's private affairs. Miss Wexford did not like to be refused. Maren could see the small tightening at the corners of her mouth, but she kept smiling. "Surely you can tell me," Miss Wexford said, "whether His Grace expects to remain in the country or to return to town for the season." "I cannot, madam. Surely you can tell me whether he intends to make any changes to the household." "I cannot, madam. You are an extraordinarily discreet man, Mr. Carrow. It is my employment, madam." Miss Wexford laughed. It was a polished, light laugh. "Then I shall have to ask him myself when he arrives. If he ever does arrive. Tell me, is His Grace always so slow?" "His Grace was ill." "Madam, yes, you have said." She set down her wine. "I do hope, Mr. Carrow, that when he does at last arrive, he is more interesting than his clerk." Maren was setting down a dish at that moment. She did not let her face change. Her hands were steady. She did not look at Mr. Carrow, but she heard him say, quietly, with no edge in his voice at all, "I am very sure he will be, madam." After dinner, Miss Wexford went up to her rooms. Mr. Carrow went into the library. Maren cleared the table. When she carried the last tray through to the kitchens, she went past the library door, and it was a little ajar, and she could see him through it. He was standing at the window. He had his hands behind his back. He was looking out at the dark garden. He was not reading. He was not drinking. He was just standing. She did not pause. She went on with her tray. But that was the night she began to wonder. The next day a man came up from the village with a message. The old miller's daughter had been turned out of her cottage. The miller had died in the winter, and the cottage had belonged to the estate, and the estate had been in a kind of waiting state for months while the new duke was away, and somewhere in that waiting state Mr. Halford, the steward, had ordered the cottage cleared for a new tenant who would pay a better rent. The miller's daughter had been told she had a week to be gone. The week had ended that morning. Her things were in the lane. Mrs. Pell heard the message and went pale. The miller's daughter was a girl of 18 named Tess. She had no mother. She had nowhere to go. She had been a quiet, sweet girl who used to come up to the kitchen door once a month with eggs. Mrs. Pell sent word at once to Mr. Halford. Mr. Halford sent word back that the matter was decided and could not be undone, and that he could not approve of any household charity for tenants who had failed to pay their rent. This was a lie. The miller had been 3 months ahead on his rent when he died. Mrs. Pell knew it. Mr. Beech knew it. Everyone knew it. But Mr. Halford was the steward, and the new duke was not yet here. And Mrs. Pell, for all her sharpness with the maids, did not have the authority to overturn the steward. She told Maren about it that evening, in her parlour, in a low, angry voice. Mrs. Pell did not usually confide in housemaids, but she was upset, and Maren was there, mending an apron. That child is in the lane, Maren, with her mother's chest and her father's kettle. In the rain. Where will she go, ma'am? There is an aunt in Pemberton. 12 miles. The aunt will not be pleased. The aunt has 6 of her own. Maren did not know what to say. She thought of Tess, who had been a year behind her in the village school, who had once given her half a pear during a long sermon. She thought of her standing in the lane. "I have sent cook out with bread and a blanket," Mrs. Pell said. "It is all I can do." Maren went to bed that night with her chest tight. She thought of writing a letter to the Duke at Marston. She thought of waylaying Mr. Carrow in the back hall and telling him. She did neither. They were not her people to speak to. She was a maid. Maids did not write letters to dukes about tenants. She slept badly. In the morning she got up and did her work. She did not know then what had happened in the night. She did not know that, after Mrs. Pell had spoken to her in the parlour, cook had gone out into the rain with bread and a blanket as ordered, and cook had come back wet and shaken, because she had passed Mr. Carrow on the lane. Mr. Carrow had been on his way back from the village. He had been on foot, in his old coat, in the dark. He had asked cook what she was doing. She had told him. He had listened. He had taken the bread and the blanket from her hands and said he would go on himself. Cook, half from cold and half from being told by a quiet man to do as he wished, had let him. Mr. Carrow had walked the last mile to the miller's cottage. He had found Tess sitting on her mother's chest in the rain, with her father's kettle in her lap, and a wool shawl over her head. He had spoken to her for some minutes. Nobody knew what he said. He had then walked her, with her chest, to the home farm, only a quarter-mile back the other way, and he had spoken to Mr. Polson, the farm tenant. Mr. Polson had a spare room above the dairy, and a wife who liked young company. By midnight Tess had been warm in that spare room. The chest had been brought in. The kettle had been set on the hob. Mr. Carrow had walked back to the great house in the rain. He had come in by the back door. He had not spoken to anyone. He had gone up to his room and changed his clothes and gone to bed. He had not told a soul. Maren did not know any of this for 3 days. She found out on a Sunday. She had gone down to the village in the afternoon to see her mother, who lived in a cottage by the church. She had taken a basket of mending. On the way back she passed the home farm, and Mrs. Polson called to her over the gate. Maren, a word. Maren went over to the gate. Mrs. Polson was a round woman with red cheeks and very kind eyes. She had a covered basket in her hand. "Take this up to that Mr. Carrow at the house," she said. "It is bread and a bit of the honey. I should bring it myself, but I am up to my elbows in cheese." "For Mr. Carrow, ma'am? For Mr. Carrow, why?" Mrs. Polson looked at her. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Has he said nothing then? About what, ma'am? So Mrs. Polson told her. About Tess. About the rain. About the chest and the kettle and the quarter-mile, and the spare room above the dairy. About the man in the brown coat who had not stayed for thanks and had not given his name to Tess, only telling her, when she asked, that he was a friend of the new Duke, and that he was sorry for the trouble, and that she was not to worry about the rent or the future, that something would be arranged. Maren stood at the gate with the basket in her hand. The Sunday afternoon was bright and cold. There were rooks calling from the wood beyond the lane. She could smell the wet grass and the cows. Mrs. Polson, she said. Yes, child, he has said nothing of this at the house. No one knows. Mrs. Polson smiled a small smile. Well, now you know. Maren walked back up to the great house with the basket. She felt something turning over in her chest that she did not want to examine. She thought about a man in a wet coat carrying a chest down a country lane in the dark. She thought about that same man being told the next morning that he was an extraordinarily discreet clerk, and about him answering, with no edge in his voice, that it was his employment. She gave the basket to one of the footmen, with Mrs. Polson's compliments, to be sent up to Mr. Carrow's room. She did not seek him out herself. She did not know how to look at him yet. The next afternoon a carriage came up the long drive. It was a fine carriage, with the Duke's arms on the door, and it was muddy from the roads. The whole house turned out in the front hall again. The line was formed again. The fires were built up again. The cook had put a goose in the oven the night before, just in case. The carriage door opened. A footman stepped down. A travelling case was handed out. A second footman descended. Then a third man, in a heavy travelling cloak, stepped out of the carriage and stood for a moment on the gravel, looking up at the front of the house. He took off his hat. It was Mr. Carrow. For a long moment, nobody in the front hall moved. They could not see him from where they stood. Only Mr. Beech at the door could see him. But Mr. Beech's face had gone the colour of old paper, and his lips had parted, and he was bowing. Mr. Carrow came up the steps. He came through the door. He was wearing the same brown coat he had been wearing for a week, but underneath it he had on a clean white shirt and a dark blue waistcoat, and his hair had been cut. He looked tired. He looked also like a man who had stopped pretending about something. He walked into the front hall. He walked past Mr. Beech, who bowed again. He walked along the line of servants. He stopped at the head of it. In front of Mrs. Pell, he did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I owe you all an apology, he said. The hall was so quiet that Maren could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. I have been a guest under your roof for nearly a week under a false name. I am not Robin Carrow. I am Sebastian Ravensmore, the new Duke of Whitcombe. The man you have been expecting is the man you have been feeding for 6 days. Nobody breathed. I had reason for the deception, he said. I will give my reasons to anyone who asks for them, but I will not have any of you finding out from a letter or a piece of gossip. I would rather you hear it from my own mouth. So, there it is. He paused. He looked along the line of servants. His eyes did not stop on any of them, but Maren felt them pass over her like a hand passing over a candle flame, near but not touching. I will be a different master from my cousin, he said. I hope to be a fair one. I will need your help to learn this house. I am very glad to find it well kept, and I am very grateful for the patience you have all shown a stranger who has tracked mud through your halls for a week. Thank you. He bowed to them. To the servants. The Duke of Whitcombe bowed his head to the line of housemaids and footmen and the scullery girl with the shaking hands. Then he turned and went up the great staircase, and the line broke into 100 small sounds, gasps and whispers and one nervous laugh, and Mrs. Pell put a hand against the wall as if she needed it. Maren did not move for a long time. She felt as if something inside her had been turned, very gently, in the wrong direction, and she did not yet know how to turn it back. That night, Miss Wexford did not come down to dinner. She had heard the news, of course. Everyone in the house had heard the news within the hour. Maren, going down with a tray to the kitchen, had seen Miss Wexford's maid coming up the back stair with a face like a thundercloud and a tray of broken glass. Something had been thrown, evidently against a wall. The Duke ate alone. Maren served. She had been told to serve because Mrs. Pell, who would otherwise have rearranged the staff for so important a meal, had been too rattled to think clearly, and because Maren was the maid the Duke already accidentally knew, he sat at the long table. He had changed for dinner. He looked perfectly correct now. Black coat, white linen. The small ring on his little finger that bore his family arms, and that he had not been wearing the first week. He looked, Maren thought, like a man wearing a costume he did not entirely like, though it fit him. He ate slowly. He spoke very little. When she set down the soup, he said, "Thank you, Miss Holloway." When she set down the fish, he said nothing. When she set down the meat, he said, without looking at her, in a voice quiet enough that only she could hear, "I am sorry." She did not answer. She did not know if it would be proper to answer. She finished her work at the table. She filled his glass. She stepped back. He laid down his knife and fork. He turned just a little in his chair, so that he was looking at her directly. There was nobody else in the room. The footman had been sent to the kitchen for a sauce. "I deceived you also, Miss Holloway," he said, "and I am sorry for it. I am sorry for it more than I can say. It was not me you were deceiving, Your Grace," she said. She kept her hands folded in front of her apron. "It was the house. It was you," he said. "It was all of you. Each one." She looked at the carpet. "May I speak, Your Grace? Please, I am only a housemaid, sir. I have nothing to forgive." "That is not true." She looked up. He was watching her. He had a face, she had decided in the last week, that did not give itself away easily, but it had given something away now. Something tired and ashamed and resolved all at once. "It is true, Your Grace," she said. "You stood in my hall and you bowed to us. I have never seen a master bow to a maid. I do not know what to do with it. You do not have to do anything with it. You walked Tess Miller to the home farm in the rain." He flinched. It was very small, but it was there. "That was not for the house to know," he said. "Mrs. Polson knew." "Yes, that was carelessness on my part. It was kindness, it was both." The footman came back with the sauce. Maren stepped further back. She did not speak again for the rest of the meal. He did not eat much. He went up early. She did not sleep well that night, either. The next day, Miss Wexford appeared at breakfast. She was wearing her best morning gown. She had had her hair done in a new way. She came into the small breakfast room with her chin up and her smile in place. And she stopped just inside the door and dropped a curtsy that was just slightly too low, and she said, "Your Grace, forgive me my absence last night. I was unwell." He had risen when she entered. He bowed. "I hope you are recovered, madam." "Quite recovered." She came forward. She took her seat. She accepted coffee from a footman without looking at him. "I confess, Your Grace, I am still a little astonished. I did not know what game we were playing." "It was not a game, madam, no?" Her smile did not waver. "Forgive me. From this side of it, it had rather the shape of one. I told you a great deal about myself. I told you, I think, things I would not have told anyone but a clerk. You did, madam, and you said nothing." "I said very little, madam, on either side. I tried to be honest in what I did say." She took a sip of coffee. She set down the cup. She looked across the table at him, and her smile was beautiful and her eyes were not. "I wonder what use a man makes of such honesty." He did not answer. He had a slice of bread in his hand. He looked at it, set it down again. "Madam," he said, "I owe you a conversation. I will give you that conversation after breakfast, in the small drawing-room at any hour you like. At 10, then, at 10. The footman watched the door. The fire crackled. Maren, who was standing at the sideboard pouring fresh coffee, kept her face entirely still. At 10 o'clock, Miss Wexford went into the small drawing-room. The Duke went in after her. The door closed. Maren did not know what was said. Nobody in the house knew what was said. But she knew. An hour later, when Miss Wexford came out, because Miss Wexford came out white about the mouth and walked straight up to her rooms and did not come down for the rest of the day. The next morning Miss Wexford's trunks were brought down. She had received, she announced over breakfast, an invitation from a friend in Bath that she could not in good conscience refuse. She would be leaving within the week. She did not look at the Duke when she said this. The Duke did not look at her. She did, however, before she left the room, turn her bright eyes on Maren, who was standing by the door with a fresh pot of coffee, and she said, in a voice loud enough that everyone in the breakfast room heard it clearly, "And do tell me before I go, Holloway, where you bought that ribbon for your cap. It is so very neat. It is a wonder. A girl with no education, no family, no advantages, and yet she has found a ribbon. The world has gone on, has it not?" It was said sweetly. It was said with a smile. It cut the air like a knife. Maren did not flinch. She did not lower her eyes. She gave one small, perfect curtsy. She said, "I made it myself, madam, from a scrap. I do not buy ribbons. Will madam be wanting more coffee?" Miss Wexford laughed. It was a thin sound. "No, thank you, Holloway. I shall not be wanting any more coffee." She left the room. The breakfast room was silent. The Duke, who had been reading a letter, set it down. He looked at Maren. He did not say anything. He did not have to. The look went all the way to the back of her neck and stayed there for the rest of the day. Miss Wexford left for Bath 2 days later. A carriage came. Her trunks went up. Her maid went up. She herself came down in a travelling cloak and said cool goodbyes to Mr. Beech and Mrs. Pell. She did not speak to Maren. She did not speak to the Duke beyond the proper words. She got into the carriage. The carriage went down the drive. The gravel made the sound that gravel makes when a carriage goes over it, and then it did not make that sound any more, and the carriage was gone, and the air in the house changed. Maren felt it change. The house breathed easier. She had not known, until that moment, how much the house had not been breathing easy. That afternoon the Duke sent for her. Mrs. Pell brought the message. Her face was unreadable. "His Grace will see you in the library at 3, Maren." "Yes, ma'am." "You have done nothing wrong." "No, ma'am." Mrs. Pell looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, more gently than usual, "Tidy your cap, child, and your apron is clean." Maren went up the back stair at 3. Her heart was beating in her throat. She knocked at the library door. He said, "Come in." She came in. He was standing by the window. The library smelled of leather and old paper, and a faint smell of wood smoke from the fire that had been laid that morning. The afternoon light came in, slanted through the tall windows, and made long pale shapes on the rug. He turned when she came in. He looked at her, and the room was so quiet she could hear the clock on the mantel ticking, and she could hear the small wet sound of a log shifting in the grate, and she could feel the warmth of the fire on her left side, and the cool of the window glass on her right. "Miss Holloway," he said, "please sit." She did not move. "Your Grace, I cannot sit in your library." "Why not?" "I am a housemaid, Your Grace." "Yes, I know what you are. I am asking you, as a guest in this room, to sit down." She sat. The chair was a small one near the desk. She kept her hands in her lap. She kept her back very straight. He did not sit. He came around the desk. He stood with his hand on the back of the chair opposite hers. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one, not the one I gave at the table. Your Grace, please let me finish." She was quiet. "When I came here," he said, "I came in disguise because I had been lied to before, many times. The last time cost me a great deal. A woman I was supposed to marry. A family. A trust. I will not bore you with it. The shape of it is that I did not believe I could tell the truth about myself and find out who anyone really was. So I lied. I came as a man of business. I thought I would watch the house for 3 days and write to my lawyer to take possession and be done with it." He took a breath. "I had not planned to stay. I had not planned to talk to anyone. I had not planned to be told, on a back stair at night, that a cracked step would matter if my candle went out. I had not planned to be told, on a path, that I was carrying a lamb wrong. I had not planned. He stopped. He looked at the fire. I have done a great deal of planning in my life, Miss Holloway. Most of it has been wrong. She looked at her hands. She could feel her face going warm. She did not know if it was the fire or his words. Why did you go after Tess? She asked. It came out small. Because Mrs. Pell mentioned it to cook in the corridor outside the study, and the door was open. And I heard. I did not think about it. I went. Mrs. Pell does not know it was you? No, and I would prefer she did not. She will find out. Then I cannot prevent it. But I will not say it myself. It is not a thing to be said. He looked at her. May I ask you something, Miss Holloway? Yes, Your Grace. That morning we met on the back stair. With the candle. Yes, were you afraid of me? She thought about it. She was an honest person. A little, Your Grace. Yes, why? Because I did not know you. Because it was dark. Because she stopped. She made herself go on. Because a man in this house can do anything he wants to a maid, sir, and the maid has no one to tell. He went very still. She watched it happen. She watched something close in him and then open, slowly, into something else. Yes, he said. I see. I was not afraid in the end. You moved aside. You held the light higher for me. That was the least. It was not the least, Your Grace. It was a thing. You did it. He sat down at last, in the chair opposite hers. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at her steadily. Miss Wexford said something to you at breakfast, he said. Yes, Your Grace. It was deliberately cruel. Yes, Your Grace. You did not answer in kind. It would not have helped, Your Grace. No, it would not have helped. But you might have allowed yourself one small piece of unkindness in return. And you did not. I would like you to know I noticed. Thank you, Your Grace. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I have done you a wrong, Miss Holloway, not only by my deception. I have set you up to be talked about in this house, and to be looked at, and to be wondered about. Because I have been less careful with my own behavior than I should have been. I have watched you when I should not have. I have spoken to you in places where I should not have spoken. I have been seen doing both. I am sorry. She could not look at him. She looked at the rug. There was a pattern of leaves on it that she had cleaned 100 times. She had never sat on it from this angle. Your Grace, she said, I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything. You are very kind. I am not. Particularly, I am trying to be honest. It is a different thing. He paused. May I tell you what I noticed first? She made herself look up. The first night, he said, in the back corridor with the chickens. You said Mr. Beech said the cracked step could wait. You did not say the step could wait. You said Mr. Beech said it. You distinguished between the rule and the truth. I have been in this house a week. Almost every other person I have spoken to has given me Mr. Beech's opinion, or Mrs. Pell's opinion, as if it were their own. You gave me Mr. Beech's opinion, and then you let me decide what to do with it. I have been thinking about that ever since. She did not know what to say. That is what I noticed, he said. Not your face, not your hair. That, I have been a soldier and a magistrate and an administrator, Miss Holloway, and I have spent my life watching the difference between people who say what they think and people who say what they have been told to think. You are the first. There are others, Your Grace. In this house? She thought. Mrs. Polson, cook, Mr. Beech sometimes, when he is tired. Then I am glad. I should like to know them better. The fire shifted. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the house, very faintly, someone closed a door. Your Grace, she said. What are you asking me? I am asking nothing yet. I am telling you a thing I should have told you days ago. I am telling you because I have been thinking about how to make this house honest, and how to make myself honest in it, and I do not see a path forward that does not begin with telling you what I have just told you. She looked at her hands. They had begun to shake, very slightly. She pressed them into her lap. "I am a housemaid, Your Grace." "Yes, I cannot be friends with the Duke of Whitcombe." "No, not as we stand." "Then, I am not asking you to be friends with the Duke of Whitcombe. I am telling you that the man you helped on the back stair, and the man you corrected about a lamb, and the man you spoke truthfully to in this room just now, is a man who would like, if he is permitted, to know you better. In whatever shape that would be possible. I do not know yet what shape that is. I have been a duke for 1 week." She let out a small breath. It was almost a laugh. It surprised her. "You have been a duke since the winter, Your Grace. I have been a duke in title since the winter. I have been a duke in this house for 1 week. That is a fair distinction. Thank you." She lifted her eyes to his. He was looking at her with great care, as if she were something he did not want to startle. "I do not know what shape that would be either, Your Grace," she said. "I have been a maid for 6 years. I know. I cannot promise anything. I am not asking you to promise anything." "What are you asking me?" He thought about it. He did not rush. The fire crackled. The afternoon light moved a finger's width along the carpet. "I am asking," he said, "if you will sit beside me at dinner tonight." She stared at him. "I have asked Mr. Beech to set 2 places at the small dining table. The one in the morning room, not the long one. I have asked Mrs. Pell to send Susanna to serve. I have spoken to no one else about it yet. I will speak to no one if you say no. The matter will end here, and I will not mention it again, and you will go on with your work, and I will go on with mine. Your Grace, if you say yes, the house will talk. They will talk for weeks. They will talk for months. They will look at you, and they will look at me, and they will not be kind in all of it. Some of it will be cruel. I cannot protect you from all of it. I will protect you from as much as I can." "Why?" she said. Her voice was very small. "Because I have sat at a long table with women who have been told all their lives that they were owed a seat at it, and I have heard them speak, and I have heard nothing. And I have sat across from a maid who has been told all her life that she was owed nothing, and I have heard her speak. And I have heard everything. I am tired, Miss Holloway. I am very tired of pretending that the difference between those 2 kinds of women is the kind of dress they are wearing. She could not breathe. She made herself breathe. They will say I am your mistress. They will say that for a month. They will be wrong. After that they will have to say something else. And what will the something else be? That will be for you and me to decide." She did not speak. The clock on the mantel ticked. The log shifted. She felt the warmth of the fire and the cool of the window. She could smell the leather of the books and the faint, sweet smell of the beeswax on the desk, and underneath all of it, very faintly, wood smoke and rain on him, the way she had smelled it the first night. She thought suddenly that she had been a small private thing for 6 years, that she had a routine of pinning her hair tight under her cap because the rule made sense, and that she had been counting ceiling tiles in rooms full of people for so long that she had forgotten she was doing it. She thought of Tess in the lane in the rain. She thought of a man in a brown coat walking her to a spare room above a dairy and not saying his name. She thought, very simply, this is the moment. If she said no, the moment would close behind her and she would go back to her work, and she would be Maren Holloway, housemaid for the rest of her life, and there would be nothing wrong with that, and there would be a long, quiet peace in it. If she said yes, there would be no peace for a long time. There would be a fight, and a great many cruel words, and a great many cold mornings, and a great many rooms in which she would not know how to stand. She looked at him. He was waiting. He was not pushing. He had folded his hands. He looked, in that moment, less like a duke than like the man on the back stair in his stocking feet. Holding a candle, looking at a cracked step. "Yes," she said. He let out a breath he had been holding for, she thought, a very long time. "Thank you, Miss Holloway." "Maren, Maren." She stood. He stood with her. He did not try to take her hand. He did not bow over her. He only stepped to the door and opened it for her, the way he had held the candle higher on the back stair, and she went through it. And she did not look back, because if she had looked back she might not have been able to walk. She went down the back stair. She went into the linen cupboard. She closed the door. She stood in the dark, with the smell of clean cotton and lavender, and she pressed her hands against her mouth, and she did not cry. She breathed for a long time. Then she came out and finished her afternoon's work. That night, at 7, in the morning room, 2 places had been set at the small table. The fire was lit. The curtains were drawn. The candlelight was warm and yellow, and it moved along the polished wood. The smell of roasted apples and good bread came up from the kitchen. Mr. Beech, who had been told only that morning, stood at the door with a face as still as a stone wall. Susanna, who had been given clean cuffs and a new ribbon, stood by the sideboard with her hands trembling and her eyes very bright. The Duke came down. He was wearing his black coat. He stood by the table. He did not sit. The door opened. Maren came in. She was wearing her own dress, a clean blue wool, plain, with a white collar. She had taken off her cap. Her hair was pinned neatly but loosely at the back of her head. She had a small silver pin in it, the one her mother had given her on her 16th birthday, that she had not worn in 6 years. She walked across the room. She did not look at Mr. Beech. She did not look at Susanna. She looked at the Duke. He looked at her. He drew out her chair. She sat. He sat across from her. The first course came. Susanna served it with hands that did not, in the end, shake. Mr. Beech at the door did not move. The fire snapped. The clock in the hall struck the quarter hour. The Duke lifted his glass. "To honest conversation," he said. "To honest conversation," she said. Their glasses touched. The small, clear sound of it filled the room. They began to talk. About the cracked step on the back stair which he had repaired that morning. About the lamb which was thriving in the dairy. About a book on the library shelf that she had once seen and wondered about. About his mother, who had been a quiet woman with a fierce sense of justice and who had died when he was 14. About her father, who had been a tenant on a farm 20 miles away, and who had taught her how to carry a lamb. About Tess, who had written a careful letter of thanks to the kind gentleman, and who was now apparently teaching the Polson children to read. They talked for 2 hours. The food was good. The candles burned down by a third. Mr. Beech, at the door, allowed his face to soften by about the breadth of a sixpence, which on Mr. Beech was a great deal. Susanna, behind the sideboard, watched with her hands folded and her eyes shining, and stored every detail to tell the kitchen later. At 9, the Duke walked Maren to the door of the morning room. He did not walk her further. He bowed to her, properly the way a man bows to a guest. She curtsied back, properly the way a guest curtsies to her host. Their eyes met for one long moment. Neither of them looked away. Then she went up the back stair to her small room under the eaves, and he went into his study, and the house went to bed, and the house, for the first time in a very long time, went to bed without holding its breath. A year later, in the spring, the lambs were being born again on the home farm. Mrs. Polson had a new dairy maid, and Tess Miller had gone to a place in town to be a teacher. The miller's cottage had been repaired and let to a young couple at a fair rent. The cracked step on the back stair had been mended, and the runner replaced. Mrs. Pell had a new young housemaid she was training. Mr. Beech had begun, in private, to allow himself one small glass of port after dinner. Susanna had married a footman from the next estate. In the small morning room at Whitcombe Park, the table was set for 2, as it was set every morning now. The fire was lit. The smell of toast and coffee filled the room. Outside, the rain was coming down softly on the kitchen garden, where the parsley had just begun to come up again. The Duke came in. He took his place. He picked up a letter. The door opened. A young woman came in. She was wearing a soft grey morning gown. Her hair was pinned neatly but loosely at the back of her head, with a small silver pin in it. She had a book under her arm, the one from the library that she had wondered about, that he had taken down for her one evening and given to her without ceremony. She sat down across from him. He did not look up. He held out his hand, palm down on the cloth. She put her hand over his without looking up either. Her fingers, which had been rough once from soap and cold water, were still strong and careful with everything they touched. The rain pattered. The fire snapped. "Good morning, Maren," he said, still reading. "Good morning, Sebastian," she said, and she opened her book. "Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive."